Oh, there you go.
We're live.
Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome to today's cyber threat landscape report in conjunction with PureCyber and Malwarebytes. Today, we're going to talk about a number of things. We'll cover off the threat landscape as it is today, the current trends. We'll have a spotlight on ransomware as a service. We're then going to talk a little bit about the cyber attack experience, where the guys are going to cover off some case studies that we've seen during our partnership over the last 12 months. There's some really interesting insight. And then we're going to talk about some proactive measures to guard against current and potential threats. And then I think we're going to finish off with sort of future threat trends, what we're seeing. I'm sure AI is going to come up in that at some point. We'll have time for questions at the end, but during the conversation, please feel free to submit questions in the chat if you can. And a reminder that all attendees will receive a cyber threat intelligence report after this session. So that's enough from me. By the way, I'm Damon. I'm the CEO of PureCyber, and it's my job to try and keep these two gentlemen on track today, if that's possible. But with further ado, I will introduce Brian and Matt. So, Brian, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Brian Kane. I am the Senior Director of Global Channels for Malwarebytes. Also, essentially kind of a cyber evangelist. So overall focused on, security. It's been in my background forever. I love talking to businesses about how we can help them and in general, the things that they can do to help themselves. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. Great for you to be here too. And I should add, you are over the Atlantic. Where are you actually today, Brian?
Yep, I'm West Coast Pacific time. I'm in Arizona right now.
Fantastic. Well, good morning to you. Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Matt. I am the Chief Defensive Security Officer here at PureCyber. So my kind of day-to-day running is our 24/7 SOC, but I also look after our kind of dark web, phishing, and vulnerability management teams. So yeah, a lot of information and yeah, a lot of knowledge of different areas really. So hopefully we can bring that in today to have a really good conversation.
Fantastic. And a reminder to everybody today that this session is being recorded and the recording will be sent out after this session. So let's start then with point one, the cyber threat landscape. And I'll open it up. Matt, what are you and your team seeing regards the cyber threat landscape today?
Yeah, it's a difficult one really where to start, right? So I think it has really evolved over the last 12 months where it's a horrible analogy, right? Where it's like a shape-shifting thief who changes disguises but always follows the same patterns. And what I mean with that is that the tactics keep evolving. So we've got more sophisticated phishing, new vulnerabilities, creative malware with AI. However, at its core, it's always consistent, right? They always exploit the weak points in the systems, whether that's human, technical, or to steal kind of that sensitive data or to hold those systems ransom. But at the end of the day, the kind of underlying threats and phishing and exploitation of vulnerabilities still lead to like that familiar consequences such as the data breach and ransomware attacks. Bri, I don't know if you've got kind of a different take on it or a similar way of looking at it.
Yeah, we see very similar things. Like you're absolutely right. I think the name of the game right now with the landscape is you have to evolve. And then I think some stuff we'll talk about as we continue to go on is you have to layer your security. Because the threats are changing, the threats are evolving. When the good guys come up with a new way to protect, the bad guys come up with a new way to sneak in, to break around. And that's what we're trying to stop. And when you have an ever-moving target, one of the best ways you can do that is to look at different ways to layer that security, because you don't know where it's coming from.
Well done, guys. We managed to last about 15 seconds into the conversation before someone did mention AI, so that's some sort of record, I think. Right, so AI. how is it affecting businesses?
Do you want me to take this one first, Bri? In terms of what we're seeing, so AI is really helping the attackers from the point of view of where, a lot of it used to be they had to have the knowledge to create the scripts and knowledge to create the malware. They're using these kind of GPTs to create the malware for them. They're using AI to place inside that piece of malware to learn to adapt about the environment. So that's where kind of we're seeing it, but it's also helping us as the kind of defenders as well, right? We're seeing AI being built into a lot of the new security products to help us detect, help us to understand the kind of latest threats.
Yeah,
sorry, Brian.
I completely echo what Matt said. Is in a world a few years ago, you had to be a top-notch hacker. You had to have all kinds of knowledge and coding and background, and to pull off successful ransomware attacks took, like Matt said, a lot of knowledge. Now we've taken a lot of that knowledge and automated it. We've made it very easy for someone without knowledge to package something up and potentially put it out there. So we've expanded the base of people who potentially could be involved in executing a ransomware attack.
So what we're saying really, because for a long time now, I mean, it's been a known in the cybersecurity industry, AI has been around a long time, but in the good old days, we would call it machine learning, right? It was binary, algorithmic. It was, and it's been around. It's been part of your platform for a very, very long time, and it's existed for a very long time. But I think what we've seen, in the last 12 months, is the implosion due to things like ChatGPT, right? The generative AI. And generative AI, I think, is what has lowered the barrier to entry, right? For it's even as something as simple as phishing emails, right? Instead of a very easy way of identifying phishing email previously was bad grammar and bad spelling, especially in the language that it was sent to the country. Now that's really, really easy. You can ask a generative AI application to produce a fantastic and really realistic phishing email. So, I mean, we're definitely seeing that. But like I said, I think the machine learning element, the foundational part of if this happens and this happens, then this means this, the MITRE framework and everything has been around for a very long time, right?
I think, Damon, one of the things you hit on there was the quality. I remember back in the day, you got an email from Wells Fargo saying, here's the logo, log into your account.
Yep.
You could kind of tell. You were like, this doesn't look very legit. Whereas I would absolutely argue some of the stuff that we see coming through, especially on the phishing side, which is where a lot of this starts, it looks very legitimate. Even to the extent that you could put your mouse over the link and kind of tell that they've got link shorteners, they've got a lot of different things that are just slightly enough off that if you didn't have a keen eye, you really wouldn't be able to tell.
I think just to add to that, Bri, I think it does work the other way, right? Where unfortunately there's a lot of instances where we have to sit on, right? And it was a case of the simple things are still being done though, right? Is a case of those horrible phishing emails, which when you look at it, anybody looks at it, you're like, why on earth did you click on this, right? But it is still enough, right? So maybe it is a case of that, we'll go over after, but that user education is still needed, and of course it's still needed. But yeah, the simple, the really kind of easy stuff is still being kind of clicked on, which we exploit now in our kind of services, our phishing simulations for our clients. But yeah, it's such a diverse bag, really.
Yeah. And I think that it's the breakdown between just bog standard phishing, but really targeted attacks like spear phishing and so on. They were, if you go all the way back to Hillary Clinton's campaign when their Gmail was hacked back in the day, that was really targeted. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was the cyber criminals attacked, won't mention any governments, but they attacked, they knew they'd been they were up till the wee hours in the morning, and they knew that it was believable enough for someone to click on it and move. Probably if they'd been sprightly and had 14 hours sleep, they probably would never have clicked on it and seen it as for what it was, which was a spear phishing email. So really important. Timing and luck is plays a lot in these, especially the targeted attacks. So any major attacks that have happened over the last couple of months that you guys have seen? I know obviously we've had the Ticketmaster one, which was quite a huge one, affected a number of people. Brian, any thoughts around those?
Absolutely. So I put a few down here that I dug into, and I wanted to highlight some of the fun stuff. So let's go back. I'm trying to think. Colonial Pipeline. So Colonial Pipeline was a great one. So 2021, the impact was massive, as this caused a huge shutdown. But when we go back to what actually happened here, I love to dig into this. So basically, this dark side group actually gained access into their IT network, encrypted everything within, essentially shutting down. But I go back to how could we have resolved? So there's the impact, there's how they dealt with it after. But I also go back to this is the discussion I like to have with businesses a lot, is man, what are the simple things that we could have done prior that if these things were done, this never would have happened? So I like to highlight a few things. One was access controls. So access controls was a major issue. If MFA would have been in place, this would have very unlikely happened. One of the other big ones was network segmentation. All right. Again, when you're dealing with critical stuff, I used to deal a lot with drinking water facilities, things like that. The security level and the separation there is key. So understanding in your business where that separation needs to be. Backup and disaster recovery plan. Again, part of the reason that one took so long, they didn't have the recovery points that they needed. But I'll bring it back to one key thing, and that is kind of that incident response and preparedness. Having an incident response plan, testing it, executing it, running through it almost like a rehearsal. These are basic things that as a business sound like, oh my goodness, you need a full team of people to do this. You really don't. You really can find vendors, partners, places like ThreatDown, places like PureCyber. You can find partners and people that will help you with things like this, because that preparedness, while it will not always 100% prevent, I don't think any of us on this call would say, hey, we have this solution that 100% prevents anything from occurring. But what I will say is those who are prepared know what to expect and know how to recover quickly. So just using that as one of the examples of major hit, major outage, cost millions and millions of dollars, but could have been easily prevented with, again, just basics.
Yeah. Matt, would you like to follow on with that? I know.
Yeah. No. It's a case of, I think I want to reiterate that we've seen massive companies get hit this year, right? I think we've had something like 10,000 data breaches this year. We've seen the biggest ever kind of the mother lode, I think they called it, right? Just like 1 billion credentials get uploaded to the dark web. And I think this week or last week, we saw pretty much, I think they class it as the world's biggest bank by total assets get ransomware. It was the Bank of China in London, but the UK arm got ransomware, right? And if you think about it, a company that big who are probably monitored to the nth degree can get done over. It's a case of, you can put everything in place to prevent these things, but it's all about the after. How are you going to recover? Are your backups working, right? Don't be in a panic state, right? We do a lot of incident response simulations, and you should see the panic the rooms go in, right? When they're trying to work out who should be doing A, who should be doing B, because it is, right? It's the worst time a company will go through.
Yeah, I agree with you both there. You and just as much, you're both dead right. It's the knowing what you have and where it is, and that preparedness helps you to recover faster, and that's what you want. You can't, Brian, as you quite rightly said, apart from turning all your digital systems off and just going home, you can't prevent something bad happening. But when it does happen, you don't want it to be a surprise, really, and you want to be able to recover because you know where everything is. So fantastic, that's brilliant, guys. So we're going to move on now to our second subject, which is a spotlight on ransomware. So Matt, I think this is something that you really wanted to talk about ransomware as a service, I believe.
Dying to do it. So yeah, ransomware, right? I think just to introduce what ransomware is and what ransomware as a service is really. So ransomware, really simple, is just a piece of kind of software that at the end of the day, malicious in nature, and encrypts all your data. And at the end of it, will ask you for some money, right? But it's the
Sounds
way
like one of my
now.
children, just say it, sorry.
It's the way now how this is delivered, right? And the major ways of this is being kind of done is ransomware as a service. You may have heard of groups called Lockbit. They're the most kind of prolific kind of ransomware group out there right now. And how these groups work is that they're a bit like Microsoft. You go to them, you ask them for a license of ransomware, and then you go away as their partner and you ransomware a company, and then that Lockbit group will take a little kind of cut out of your whatever you get paid, and that's how it works. There's terms and conditions on these software, right? Where I've seen when a company gets ransomware by Lockbit and negotiations start, they can't go under 50% of the ransomware amount. So if it's £1 million, the group can't accept below 500,000 because that's Lockbit's rules. And we're just seeing this get worse and worse and worse, right? Lockbit is like any other company you'll see, right? They have a customer service, they have a technical department, right? They have people who outreach and phone and call. It's just a different world, really. And that's what it is. And Brian, if you want to kind of add to that.
Yeah, so I'll just add a little piece to that. So a question that I get asked very frequently is, how many people actually pay? Like, I get this question all the time because we deal with thousands and thousands of customers. And here's the truth, quite a few.
Yeah.
People like, well, why did they pay? Well, because they weren't prepared. Their stuff wasn't backed up and they need their data. A lot of people ask me, like, do they actually give them their data back? The answer is most of the time, yeah. And here's why, because then people wouldn't pay. Again, we forget, and you highlighted it right there. Lockbit is operating like a business. Like this is purely financial. Now, are there targeted, very specific, like malicious attacks tied to other things in the world? Sure. But I would venture to say the majority that we see and we experience truly is tied to this financial gain. That really is what it is.
I think these groups as well, right? They understand that the lower, I think what we're seeing is they're putting lower ransomware amounts. Instead of being 500,000, it's 40,000, right? And someone did a study quite recently and they've seen a major increase in all these ransomware payments. And I do think they are very aware of cyber insurance, right? It's a case of, yes, whether it'll pay or not is one question, but I've seen that side, and I know they are very aware that most likely they'll get a payment on it if that company is insured.
Well, we have seen that on several occasions, haven't we, Matt? Where,
Yeah.
unfortunately, where organizations have had their data exfiltrated through ransomware, they they look for those documents. They find that the maximum payout is £1 million for a cyber hack. Then that's it, and then they just cut back because obviously the company, the standard process is they'll say, well, we've got no money, we can't afford it, we're doing this, doing that. They'll say, no, you can, because your insurance policy is here, and they'll throw that back in your face. So yeah. I mean, separation of your data is pretty important. Yeah. So I think I thought of a new podcast, Matt, where you were on about earlier about they've set their price they're setting their price and they won't be below a certain number. I'm glad to know that they're protecting the bottom line and they're conscious of their GP. That's wonderful. But it's almost unethically ethical, right? But this has always been a thing, right? Brian, you've been in this industry nearly as long as I have, probably, and yes, this has been something that's been around for so long, right? This is nothing new.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're just seeing the newest versions of this.
Yep.
I mean, I remember dealing with worms and all kinds of other stuff. Like this is just the latest version, and I think, again, we touched on it a little bit ago, but the difference being, instead of advanced, crazy technical people being few and far between controlling this, with GPTs, with other stuff, we've put it in the hands of many people. We've made it available to the consumer. So these people can jump on with Lockbit and say, hey, I know of a few places where I could probably, hop in here and do a few things. We've opened the gates.
Yeah, fantastic. And Matt, you and your team, obviously, you have insight to what's going on in the dark web with the cyber threats, intelligence and the analysis. What are you seeing in the last 6 to 12 months around that?
I think around the dark web bit, I think just to touch on the groups, we've seen probably one of the biggest kind of times of these groups being created, right? We've had one group in August called Hell Down, I think they're called, but in 1 month alone, they've had 18 ransomwares. So within a month, they've hit that many people. Imagine in a year's time where we've seen Lockbit get taken down. But I think that probably made the situation worse. They got taken down twice and a resurgence, and made them probably pretty angry. And they've changed now a lot of their encryption techniques, where in the first kind of quarter, it like double, I think, what 2023 looked like, right? But then kind of going over what else we're seeing on the dark web, it's the transfer and the selling of these kind of VPN certificates, the RDP connections, right? They're going for as little as $20, right? $20 just to get that initial foothold in a network, right? It's that simple for these groups.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Brian, I'm sure you and the ThreatDown platform are seeing a lot of the similar things.
Absolutely. I mean, you highlighted, Matt, just another key thing, which is something that's changed is we've talked about exfiltration, a few other things, that data has become key. Like that is the other thing is grabbing all sorts of personal data, identification data, things like that. And again, you guys spend a lot of time like looking at that dark web piece. I think a lot of people maybe like Matt, that this might be something kind of cool to talk about. Like, I think a lot of people like hear the word like the dark web, but I think a lot of times people maybe don't understand what that actually is. Like, it might be good to like explain like, hey, the dark web is very real, but essentially, I mean, it's kind of like a giant database of information.
Yeah, comes the iceberg. Go on then, Matt.
No, I'm not going to explain it like that, right? But at the end of the day, the dark web, right, is just pretty much it's very easy to access, right? A lot of people will go, oh, it's really hard, right, to get into the dark web. And I think it's not, right? And that is the first thing. You download an application and that's it. You're connected into that unindexed, nightmare-filled kind of thing, right? Where there's just forums and blogs and marketplaces where at the end of the day, a lot of bad happens, but the dark web was also created for that bit of good, in essence. It was there to allow freedom of speech from countries where it's not really kind of, you're not allowed to, right? So, it does have its kind of positives in a very, very little kind of use case, but unfortunately, it's widely used for this kind of marketplace of selling of information, or kind of where all these kind of ransomware groups host all their blog sites for you to go to and see, or pay them as well, right?
Well, that's always been the case with absolutely everything. We talked about AI tools earlier, right? A lot of these AI tools are created to defend, but they reverse them and they're used to attack. Then Cobalt Strike, perfect example, right? Absolutely
Yeah.
perfect example. And the same with you are completely right with the dark web. It was to help dissidents, people isolated in countries that control and restrict the internet and activity around and access around that and knowledge and information. And that's where it came from. But it's been turned into something much darker, much worse. Right. I know, guys, I think you want to talk a lot on section 3 around the case studies, and give some real detail about things that PureCyber and Malwarebytes and ThreatDown have worked on over the last couple of months, which is really, really interesting. So I think we'll move along to that. And Matt, I know we had some work to do with a manufacturing company a few months back, when in fact it's December 23 that the thing started. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? But I'm sure Brian will be able to inject his wisdom through this as well.
Yeah, definitely. So if I introduce kind of what happened, it was about literally just before Christmas, and we onboarded this client, but unfortunately it's a bit too late. So they had they're a group manufacturing client, and they received a phishing email pretending to be an RFQ, right? So it was a case of, look, can you fill this out? The user didn't really spot it was a phishing email. He thought it was all good, and then provided, and then, as always, logged in, clicked the link, logged in, gave away his credentials, and that was it, right? They were in his account, creating rules. They were also then linking the M365 backend. So a lot of these phishing attacks these days will use something called consent phishing. So Microsoft allows kind of third-party apps to be integrated into Microsoft 365. And then that can allow them to send emails, right? So use a third-party email sender, hook that in, and then you can use that compromised mailbox to send thousands upon thousands of emails. So, and that's what really happened with this one. So they created an application. They sent hundreds of emails from the account. But unfortunately, in this case as well, one of those emails then went to another part of the group for the manufacturing client. And they unfortunately fell for it. And then this happened again, right? It was that constant cycle of kind of impact them and then do it again, impact them, do it again, just to spread out this initial compromise. So when we then started that investigation piece, they were using kind of, I'm going to name it Panda AV, right? So they were using Panda AV as an antivirus. And of course, we wanted to do a couple of tests to make sure, was that doing its job, right? And we don't expect AV to do everything, but the simple things wasn't being done. So in this case, if they had another AV, let's go ThreatDown platform, right? Because we have tried it with this, the phishing link got picked up straight away, right? And it was that kind of simple thing where the link to where they went to, the login screen, would have been blocked. We saw that the users had no clue about the phishing emails that they received. I think Brian touched on it. It's that user awareness piece where they were very, very kind of dodgy looking emails, right? Big red boxes, big blue kind of click on me OneDrive files. Someone shared something with you. I think it went to like a OneNote with like a blurred PDF kind of image, saying please click on this to make it kind of unblurred. So it was the simple things that just wasn't really being done.
Well, and I think, one of the things you touched on early in there, Matt, was like, so when we think about, I'll touch on insurance a little bit, like when we think about the liability, so that initial breach of credential then led to, obviously exfiltration of the contact list. Then they went and took that, sent it out to that set of contacts, again, hoping to snag one of those or another one of those and expand beyond that. So again, when we think about that data grab, one of the things that kind of spins in my mind, and this is something like, as you dig into cyber insurance, what's covered versus what's not covered, you could potentially start to create these chain reactions. This is where that user awareness training comes in, because if you become victim to that, your contacts get exposed. All of your people get sent this link now, and 2 to 3 of those people click it, they infect their 3 different companies. Now we've got a whole downstream of ransomware attacks, data exfiltration going on. We can be 4 or 5 companies deep off of one phishing email.
Yeah, like you're completely right, and the minimum standards in cyber insurance have risen, and the bar is being raised constantly. Matt, you're dead right though about you mentioned Panda AV, and the tests that we did to see if that was getting protected. But there are so many organizations, and this is one of the things, Brian, as we've talked about it before, but the standard, we have a very basic standard in the UK called Cyber Essentials. But one of the things it does do, and always shocks me because so many companies don't do it, is actually test to see if antivirus works. It's amazing because so many organizations have antivirus enabled, but quite often the function of detection and everything can be turned off, mainly because it'll be something like the organization has a legacy app installed or something like that, and it's breaking it, so it keeps detecting it, stopping the application working, and instead of finding a proper solution and creating rules, people just turn it off. And we'll turn off real-time protection because we'll come back to that later. So it's something that we see all the time, and you have the standards like Cyber Essentials, which actually test to see things, just to make sure if the basic things are actually working, because it is always the basic things: user education. Does your AV detect the errors and the problems and so on? And likewise, that's where the minimum standards has come in with cyber insurance as well, which is fantastic. Sorry, Matt. Go.
No. With this one again, and you'll hear me say this a lot. Really, is that the simple settings in Microsoft, right? There's 2 simple settings that would have stopped this. You have something called consent and permissions in Azure Identity, right, where you can't allow any user to integrate an app, right? Because it's a bit like shadow IT, but shadow apps. So if you do not do this by default, so it's enabled by default for all users to install anything they want into their profile. It's a bit like having admin to your local machine. So if they just turned that off, they would not have been able to send those thousands or hundreds of emails from the account, right? And it was something else where it takes them usually around a week to get back into the account. So it's like a queue, really. They compromise an account and they come back around to that compromised. A lot of companies now, you can do this in Microsoft where you do a session timeout. So after 24 hours, you should be re-authenticating, making users re-authenticate, re-MFA, because they do it once that 24-hour period. It's like logging into your laptop. Everyone's expected to log into their machine. So why not expect them to log into their email?
Yeah, well, I have a question for you guys. An organization gets infected with ransomware, okay, because that can happen because users can do silly things, okay, and systems do get infected with ransomware. What is the one true proper recovery that you can do? What is the one protection that you can have in place to allow you to get back to work?
Matt, I'll let you take it first. Go for it.
We've got to take the easy one, right? You got to take the backups piece. No,
that's it. There you go. Backups. Thank you. Oh my God, that was harder than I thought it was going to be. Guys, that leads us on to our medical practice incident. Matthew, would you like to talk about that one that we saw?
Of course I can. So again, January this year, it was when Lockbit got taken down, and unfortunately, these guys were the first company to get hit by them again, right? So these was when Lockbit was angry, and you could see this in the kind of activity that they were exposed to. So we went in blind, and we had no clue what had happened, but we managed to understand that they had a Citrix kind of gateway, and unfortunately, that wasn't patched, and that will lead me on to making sure your MSP is doing their job, right? Because when asked if this gateway was patched, or why this gateway wasn't patched, we were kind of told that this was the latest and greatest when it was installed, right? A couple of months before, but unfortunately, you have to keep on top of that piece. So once they were in via that kind of gateway, it pretty much allowed them to do whatever they wanted on those RDS servers. They managed to compromise a profile, then install multiple tools to do with kind of hacking and red teaming, so dumping kind of passwords. And unfortunately, again, the AV was picking it up. It wasn't stopping it, But the biggest problem here is that AV wasn't monitored. Some of the detections were literally labeled hacking tool and password dumping, right? It was literally screaming at them in terms of these alerts. So once they had dumped all the passwords and they had admin kind of privileges, I think about 2 days later, they pretty much ransomware the entire network. But unfortunately for them as well, they managed to get into the RDP gateway for their partner company and then ransomware all of them as well. When they went to recovery mode, one half of the company had backups, and fortunately, they were offsite. The other half also had backups, but they were only on-site and not off-site. But the company thought and was aware that they were having off-site backup. So it kind of caused a bit of a difficult conversation, I should say, when that one came out. But it's just one of the biggest examples of doing the simple things right.
Yeah,
Brian.
I've literally always said, like, the best protection and the surefire way to protection is a 3-2-1 backup. You should have 3 copies, 2 separate types of media. One should be offsite or online. It's somewhere else. I mean, because then at least So I used to talk like RTOs and RPOs all the time. So time objective, point objective. How far back do you need to go? How fast do you need to be back up? So depending on, in fairness, how much money you want to spend, you could choose literally like, hey, we got ransomware at 8 in the morning. Awesome. I can roll you back to 7 a.m. and we're good to go. Like, how do you want this? Pick your flavor.
And it needs to be tested as well, right?
Exactly. But if you can do that, you literally take the power away from the bad guys. If you are doing that, sure, like you could try to decrypt, you could try to do all this other stuff. But if it's true ransomware, your files are just getting encrypted, then I just say, great, I'll just put the files right back. We've tested it, we know where it is, we know how it works, and it's fast. It's the simple stuff.
Yeah, that return, getting back up and running is really important. We had one organization, we didn't deal with it, but I remember speaking to the IT manager. The systems were encrypted. They had backups, but the backups took 7 days to restore,
Yes.
which was, amazing, right? So
if you've ever tried to download a backup off of like an AWS Azure or anything else, some people don't realize like that pull down can be quite extreme, which is why I always recommend like some sort of offsite media or something like that, just because you're absolutely right. I've seen stuff take weeks.
And the impact of that, and the only way you know it is by doing a test restore and testing your backups. Is dead right. So moving along slightly, Brian, before the webinar started, we were having a good chat, and you're on about offboarding employees, right? So really, really important. Something that is seldom done. And Matt has I think this is the final case study that we're going to talk about today. Matt has got something that I'm sure you will love, and you're going to talk about as well. So Matt, would you like to talk us about our offboarding issue?
Yeah, so this one was being monitored, and thankfully for them, they had this going on. So our SOC picked up that a member of staff for a car dealership was logging in all over the world. And once we raised that back, we wanted to do some research. So we used kind of our threat intelligence tools to understand, is there anything going on for that company? And we could see that about 3 or 4 days prior to all of this activity, one of the users came up as having something called stealer malware. The easiest way to explain this is like a keylogger for your machine, records absolutely everything, then sells it. So we knew that their credentials got breached, right? We could see them in plain text, what was going on. So once we had some communication back from the client, we found out that the user hadn't been at the company for 3 years. So what that meant was all this activity didn't actually happen on a business machine. It happened on the personal device of the user. So everything kind of was out of scope, but unfortunately, it just, it impacted them the same way. But again, MFA saved the day here because the profile had MFA. All they could really do was just log in and get stuck. And that's all they were doing, really. So thankfully, one of the protections worked, but the major kind of thing with offboarding didn't go through. They should have removed that profile straight away. And when I kind of reviewed their tenancy after that, I think we raised something like 10 users not being there over the last kind of 3 years. So that was a major piece for them to kind of look at.
Absolutely. You hit the highlight, which is insider threat. It's a very real thing, but it's so easily preventable. We see this constantly. Someone left the company 8 months ago, or in your case, 3 years ago, but their user's never been disabled. I'll relate this to I'll date myself a little bit. We used to deal with this with RDP sessions all the time when we did terminal servers, things like that. One of the things we would always do is we would set an expiration for 4 hours, 8 hours, which usually pissed people off. but we would do that because what it did was it forced that person at a minimum to have to re-authenticate again. Versus just, hey, there's an open logged in session just sitting out there, on port 1389, and people can go do what they want. Insider threat is real, especially with the fact that, let's face it, a lot of companies have moved to the cloud. They've moved to O365, they've moved to Google, they're using virtual machines, things like that. So the fact that, I used to have to go into the office to potentially exfiltrate company data. Now, as an individual, you're exactly right. I could take my iPad, I could take my laptop, I could be wherever I am, and if I've got a username password, I can get in.
Yep, the data is outside the walls of the castle these days, isn't it? Completely.
Yeah.
So, right, you're going to take it in turns to answer these questions now, but I don't know. I don't care which one of you does it first, okay? So what are the first steps a business should take to protect itself? Go on, Matt, I'll pick on you.
God, where do you start? In the case of, as you said earlier, Damon, to protect themselves, you can't really protect yourself without knowing where your data is and kind of what type of data that is, right? It's a introduction of the simple things, having MFA across all your users, right? And some people on this webinar today are going, "What? People haven't got MFA still?" No, right? It's all they've thought they've rolled it all out and not realize it's only 80% of all users, and there's a couple of users who are still not doing it, right? Yeah, go on, Bri.
A couple?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say I'll highlight 2 key things. So one is, we touched on this a little bit ago, system patching and updates. Because we've literally talked about today how these threats evolve, change. Well, we have to evolve and change. One of the ways we do that is through software patches, through updates, things like that. Those are critical. Maintaining your machines is a critical thing to stay continually protected. I can't tell you how many breaches or things we see for stuff that was patched months ago. We're like, if you would have just had this hotfix or this patch, this would have never happened. So that one is definitely key.
Well, I think they're both great examples, guys. Completely. No, totally. It's worth saying that. So another question, I suppose it's like a statement, but it will lead to a question, I suppose. Supply chain is a huge, huge issue. So organizations understanding and appreciating their part in the supply chain, because we all have that part, right? And understanding our vulnerabilities. Matt, we'll start with you. I suppose, where do businesses begin understanding how they exist in that supply chain? So I'll provide a little bit of more explanation for you. So how they can be impacted to affect their customers, or how they can be impacted by their suppliers and everything. So that complete chain, and we won't mention pages in this conversation at all, but that's fine.
No, so we're seeing, right, that it's a case of, instead of going after the real big companies, it's those smaller companies, right, who provide the little pieces of probably, I don't know, the information, or it's the manufacturer of the nuts and bolts who kind of give that back to the big company, and they're the ones who are being targeted, right? Because once you're in there, you'll probably be able to work your way back up to maybe it's a bank, right? So, and we also saw it with, I'm going to say it, right, CrowdStrike, right? They played like a part in this supply chain with Microsoft, right? They think they were on like 10% of Windows devices or 8%, something like that, but they took down nearly everything, right? It was a case of we saw trains, we saw shops, we saw a lot of stuff not work anymore because of where their client base was.
Absolutely. So going back to exactly like that supply chain piece is we've seen an increase, I think it's like 50% year over year for attacks on specifically SMBs. And the reason being is the perception is exactly that. They are less mature in their cybersecurity stance, their stack, their exercises. They're not doing a lot of times even those basics. So by starting there, a lot of times they're able to kind of work themselves up and work themselves through. So if we can do a better job protecting at that initial layer, I think we'd see maybe less impact up here. But a lot of times, if you fully follow these attacks all the way back, a lot of them do, like you just said, start sometimes at that smaller level because they're perceived as they're weaker. Like you don't have a SOC, you don't have a bunch of IT people on staff. Like you're an easy target.
So I think probably the supply chain sort of has to work its way backwards, and then it would resolve itself. So what I mean by that, so if you're a company, your clients should be pushing demands onto you, right? So, but if you take your company, you should assess the organizations that supply to you, and then you need to understand the impact that each of those companies can have on your company. At that point, then you make a decision to think, well, actually, this is incredibly sensitive to us. It exposes our data. It does this. So then you're going to set your own minimum standards for that supplier. So if that supplier then doesn't meet those standards, so you might even be as basic as, well, if we're going to work with them, they're going to have Cyber Essential Standard and Plus. If they don't, we can't because they're not taking cybersecurity seriously. And that's decisions that a company has to make. And then you have to be really bold with that. If they don't meet your minimum standards because you've analyzed the risk that plays for you, then you move to another company that does do that. So it's that balance, because just because you're working with a supplier who's is maybe really cheap, right? But if you go with another company that's twice as much, but they're really secure, you've got that protection. So do you think that's fair, really?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best examples, I'll use it because it affects things globally. Look at credit card processors, or look at Amex, MasterCard, Visa. So there's a compliance standard, and it's PCI DSS, and this is one of those things where, like, is it perfect? No, but it's where they run through that same exercise of like, hey, like if you want to be able to process credit cards in your business, then here's a list of minimum standards that you need to meet to be able to do that. Like that's where we follow that down. Yeah.
Yep, I completely agree. So I think we're coming to the last 10 minutes of our talk now. So brilliant. It's been really good, guys. So let's talk about outlook and emerging threats. So I've been given 4 sort of titles that we're going to talk around really quickly. So relatively short answers, I suppose. But so emerging and future threats, AI-powered attacks. How do we see those transforming?
Yeah, I think, as we said earlier, right, it's using AI from the attacker side more and more. So then building their own GPT or scripts to create these pieces of the malware that can evade kind of the security tools that we put in place. I think that's where it sits really right now. And then I think that will just grow and grow. We're seeing the kind of AI-powered phishing emails. You can get ChatGPT to do it right now, right? It'll try and stop you, but there's ways to say, it's for educational purposes. right? And we do that now for our clients, and people fall for it. So that's only going to get better. So I really probably is now starting that maybe a training element of a lot of people can tell when people have done something in ChatGPT. There's always an order, there's a format, how the wording. So I think more education around picking up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more widespread. I think if I was going to pick a little nugget out of that, one of the things I would say is I think we are going to see, maybe even over the next few years, more of an evolution of personal attack or like very targeted attack. You're going to have that disgruntled employee that wasn't offboarded well, or just different things that happen where, again, this person in a normal world would never have been able to like go after this person or like try to take revenge on someone. Some of those keys are going to be at people's fingertips. And again, that's why doing some of those basic protections, having the MFA, doing proper offboarding, things like that will help. Because I think, again, we're putting this in the hands of more people now.
Yeah, fantastic. So I know we've talked about ransomware and ransomware as a service earlier, and we've seen that evolution of ransomware over the last few years, where good old ransomware initially was just ransomware that locked out your files. Then we had the exfiltration, and then we have the exfiltration and the dumping of the data on the dark web. And so where do we see the next evolution? Oh my gosh, evolution of ransomware going? I'll start. Go on, Brian.
Sure.
This is blue sky thinking for ransomware.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what we experience today is, we're going to encrypt your stuff. We're going to do this. I think we're going to see more. So I know a lot of people on the personal, like consumer side see this. I think we're going to see some evolution on the business side too. And that is like more extortion type stuff, more threatening type stuff where it's, hey, because of the controls we have, we didn't encrypt your files. We captured video, we captured your website history. Everyone always jokes about, hey, what would you say on your deathbed? And I've seen the jokes many times. Please clear my browser history. I think we're going to see some extortion. We're going to see threats. We're going to see people, really like coming after people with things like that, which will scare people. Even if what they're saying isn't 100% true, I'm sure a lot of this will be AI driven, made up, but we've seen the movies. We've seen what this can turn into, phone calls from people that aren't the people you think they are, videos being modified, things like that. I think we're going to see that side of this evolve, Mission Impossible style.
Yeah, you are right. And the actual process of extortion has a psychological effect on people that stops them from thinking straight and thinking clear. Well, wait a minute. No, I've never been on that website, or I don't do that. It's people worry and they think, they just generally do. Matt, the same question over to you.
I just think Bry's really hit the. I think Bry's really hit the nail on the head, right? It's that case of it's just going to move that way. It's really looking at the case of how these groups will keep changing and how they work, right? We've seen movements now with making it cheaper in terms of those ransomware payments to make it more affordable, right? And that's where really I see it going in essence, and how that kind of blackmail element and making you pay and then hooking into that will just grow over time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're completely right. Do you know, I had a meeting. This is like another point. I had a meeting with someone last week who's the IT manager, IT director of an organization, and he was talking about the fact that he doesn't want to push his company's infrastructure to the cloud. He was really uncomfortable with it. Didn't want to do it. I mean, this was in 2024. I thought this was an amazing conversation. And in his opinion, his Microsoft Exchange server farm was way more secure and safer than ever going to. It wasn't in cloud. It was Microsoft 365. Right. So these people, and this wasn't a small organization at all, and it was governed by the FCA as well. It was just unbelievable. Right? So with that in mind, majority of organizations these days have some or most it is cloud infrastructure, as you alluded to earlier, Brian, when the data is now outside the castle walls and everything. Are we going to see more targets? Are we happy and confident that organizations' cloud infrastructure is secure and locked down and is going to be safe? Is there going to be something that happens over the next couple of years that makes people scared and then they come back to hardware on site?
Yeah, I think we've seen, obviously everyone's moving everything to the cloud, right? But there's obviously those big risks of that, like what we've seen, where you've got your misconfigured S3 buckets, and all of a sudden, all your data is now sitting on Google for somebody to download, right? We saw that with those kind of sports teams. So it is more of a kind of, not priority, but there's more of a kind of thing on it now where we saw last week, I think the UK is bringing in that all data centers are going to be classed as CNI, so critical national infrastructure. So that means they go for a lot more kind of checks and policy work. And probably if you want to work with that data center again, that will then trickle down the supply chain, as we were saying before.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Right, the big hook is coming out now. I'm being told to wrap these things up, right? So very quickly, I know we have one question that talked about supply chain, and I know we've spoken about that. So hopefully we answered that question during the talk. But I've got another question here about what about using AI to protect businesses from phishing and other attacks? There are lots of security vendors advertising how they can use AI to protect companies and organizations. Lovely, very quick one-word answers with these guys. Well, maybe more than one word, but Matt, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I think AI is just going to be used now across everything. And we started talking about that kind of good piece, and probably question how much of it is AI, but that's a conversation, a rabbit hole for another discussion. But
yes,
we're seeing it pop up everywhere, right? We're seeing it in ThreatDown's platform, right? It's probably a segment over to kind of Bri.
Yeah, I mean, I would just highlight here, even very agnostically, just do your due diligence. Leverage third-party analysts. Look at things like MITRE. Look at stuff like that. So do your due diligence. If you're considering a product or looking at different products to help protect your business, do some research, dig into it, or ask a trusted partner or trusted advisor what they're using and how it's working for them too.
Yeah, completely. I always agree with that. Right. So closing remarks, guys. Fantastic. Thank you so much for today. It's been brilliant. Matt, final word of wisdom for you to the audience today. How do they stay secure?
Just keep it simple, right? Make sure your MFAs enforced across your company. Make sure your backups are being tested, right? Yeah. And just start thinking about what's going on.
Brian?
100% echo what Matt says. The only thing I would add is put it in a plan. Create an incident response plan for your business with those basic things, and you are absolutely a step up and above the rest. So just take it back to the basics.
Amazing. That icon, Mike Tyson, had one of the greatest quotes ever, isn't it? Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. So I would have finished with, how do companies start becoming more secure? I would have said because they should use ThreatDown and PureCyber, the perfect combination to keep companies secure. Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. I think we're finishing dead on time, which is amazing. So I'll be allowed to have tea tonight. Amazing. Take care, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.